evening. So we are continuing our study of Proverbs. If you're visiting with us or streaming online, my name's Charles Plemons. We've been studying this since March, going through September. And if you're going to be with us, you're just joining the class, we have workbooks that we can hand out. If you need a worksheet for tonight, I've got that also. And we're just about done with Section 7, and we'll start Section 8 tonight. So we may have an opportunity to hand out worksheets for that as well. So anybody need any of the workbooks or worksheets currently? There you are. All right, anybody else? All right, so we almost got done with Section 7 last week. So we've been talking about this idea of cultivating lazy fruit. So if you are going to engage in laziness, there are certain things that you can expect will be the result of that. Now, again, there's no black and white, no guarantee here that all of these things will come true in your life, but you increase the odds of these things happening to you if you go down the path of laziness. And remember, we established that laziness is sinful. Laziness is avoiding doing the duties that God has put before us, and that can be something in this world that is worldly. We are here to labor, we are here to work, but it can also be spiritual things. If we aren't working on our faith, we are not making active progress toward our relationship with God and our relationship with just each other and our faith, that's a sign of laziness as well. So we have these instructions of all the things that could happen to us if we engage in that path. So some of the things that we have on the list here, number one was poverty. Again, this doesn't mean just because someone is poor that they are lazy. That is not the lesson. Please don't take that from this. What we're saying is if you're lazy, you have a higher likelihood of being poor than being even comfortable or well off. You can end up in debt or servitude. You can have unfulfilled desire. You want something, but you're not willing to put in the effort to achieve it. You can bring shame upon yourself. You can bring shame upon your family. You can bring shame upon your place of employment. I think we talked about the idea of who are you going to send as the representative of your company? The hard worker or the lazy person? Well, if it's the lazy person, what's that say about your company? That's not a good business practice. Just obnoxiousness in general. And then we talked about, once again, gossip. Gossip has come up several times. Then we got to a slide that I think we got to the very end of, but I want to go over it again just to make sure that we covered all of it. So we've been talking about all of the problems with laziness, and then we started talking about the opposite, the virtues of diligence. So we are instructed that the wise man is diligent in his work, and there are several things that can be said in the positive about the diligent worker. And so we talked about the self-discipline concept, and we brought up this idea of the ant. You see an ant going about doing its work. The ant doesn't need a supervisor standing by saying, hey, ant, get back to work. You need to do this. You need to do that. The ant just does their job. They have this motivation. They are self-disciplined. So we have, from Proverbs, it tells us, go to the ant, you sluggard. The ant is an example for us. Do what you're here to do. You don't need someone standing over you. We talked about motivation. So the diligent person is motivated. They want something. They put in the effort to get it. I think we talked about last week the idea of how motivated are we in our spiritual journey. Are we willing to put in the work to build up our faith? And so that includes things like picking up the word and studying. We talked about memorizing verses. We talked about just coming to class, coming to church, interacting with fellow Christians. All of these things are efforts that if we are motivated to build our faith, that's work that we can be putting in, and you see that in our lives. And then we mentioned prosperity. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean great wealth, but you have a better chance of being prosperous in your life if you are not lazy, if you're diligent in your work. How many times have you seen in the workplace people who put in that extra effort, that extra mile, they get rewarded? Now, we know there's certainly exceptions to that. There's exceptions to just about everything we talk about. But more times than not, if you have a lazy worker and a diligent worker, which one is going to rise higher in the company or the situation? Should be the diligent one. Now, there's all kinds of different factors. Well, maybe this is the son of the CEO that's the lazy person. There can be all kinds of factors that come into this. But all other things equal, the diligent person, more often than not, is going to come out ahead in this scenario. So if you want to be better off in your life, more prosperous in your life, be diligent. Be a hard worker. Put the effort into doing the things that you know you need to do. That can be physical things, that can be spiritual things. You want to be a good, faithful Christian? Be diligent. You can prosper then in your faith. So I think we got through all three of those last week, but I just want to make sure we hit those again because the bell was ringing right there at the end. So that gets us to our conclusion slide. And one of the things we need to understand is that work, even though it is one of those four-letter words, it is one of those things that few people just jump up and down in ecstatic glory that, oh, I get to now go to work, I get to perform work. This is not a curse from God. It was part of the original plan. We were always meant to be workers. Turn with me to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis 2, and we're looking in verse 15. It says, "Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it." Why was man put in the garden? To take care of it. Now, did this happen before or after sin entered the world? Before. So we see all the things that happened bad and negative in the world after sin entered. We know there were drastic changes that happened in the world. But the introduction of work wasn't one of those things. Work came first. God built us with a purpose. We're not meant to be created and do nothing. We are designed as workers from the very beginning. Now, I don't know if that'll help you anymore on Monday morning when that alarm rings or not, but we are meant to do something, to be productive, to work in God's kingdom. So, really, we're privileged then to do things that are productive. That might be being a wage earner. That could be things that involve taking care of the stuff that we have. That could be taking care of the people that are in our lives. How hard do you work when you're taking care of someone who is in need? Tremendously hard. That is effort. That is work. So work doesn't have to be something that just comes with a paycheck. Okay, so work can have all these different things, but we are privileged to do that. And we know this partly because of the satisfaction that we can gain when we see the results of our efforts. Gardeners, you go out there and you till the soil and you put in your plants and you start seeing this beautiful garden come up, and you got to keep going out there. You got to keep taking care of the weeds. You got to run off the rabbits. You got to tie things up as they grow. I mean, it's work. But what's the payoff? Don't you have this wonderful satisfaction when you bite into that tomato that you've grown, or the green pepper, or whatever it is that you grow, or if you're growing flowers and things like that, you just see this beautiful result of this, we gain satisfaction in the work that we do. There's a payoff for it. Consider the prisoner. He sits in a cell and he has no labor. That's not a life of ease. That's part of the punishment. It's part of the punishment. What are you doing productive? What are you working toward? What are you accomplishing? We're meant to work. A lot of times we find our self-esteem is tied to our labors. We feel good about ourselves. We feel good about the things that we do. And that has application in both physical and spiritual realm. How do you feel when you accomplish something in the church? If you have ever had a conversation with someone and then later on they end up getting baptized, how do you feel about that? That lifts you up. That encourages you. We put so much value in the results of the work that we do. That idea of watering the seeds, when we see those come to fruition, when we see those bloom, that has so much effect on us. So, at all things, both physical, worldly things, and in a spiritual, faith-based manner, we're to be diligent, not lazy. Now, we're not working solely because it makes us feel good. We're not working solely to be prosperity or to be prosperous. We're not working solely for the results. Those are the side effects of these things. Those are things that can help keep us going, help keep us motivated. We work because, one, God has commanded it, and two, we're built to do it. We are designed to be God's workers. And so that's why all these things fall into place when we're doing what we were meant to do. And that's where I intended for us to wrap up last week. We just had one bell too soon. So, any thoughts or comments on anything in this section? All right, it's going to be another low coffee night. That's all right. All right, well, let's move on then to section 8. And I've got handouts for section 8 here. All right, who all needs that? All right, he's got a few more. I've got one. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks, sir. All right, so the next thing we want to talk about now, section 8 starts talking about the use of the tongue, the things that happen when we speak, when we talk. And Proverbs has a tremendous amount to say about the use of the tongue. So we've got a lot of reading to look at here in the next couple of nights. So first of all, we need to understand that the way that we use our tongue or our speech, our words, it can have tremendous or grave impact on our current life. And Proverbs has several things to say about that. So let's start in Proverbs chapter 13. And we're going to look at verses 2 and 3. Proverbs 13, verses 2 and 3. It says, "A man shall eat well by the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the unfaithful feeds on violence. He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lips shall have destruction." All right, turn several pages over to Proverbs 21 and verse 23. Proverbs 21, 23. And this tells us, "Whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles." All right, so we have these two verses here that give us a very important lesson. So the first one says, he who guards his mouth preserves what? His life. Preserves his life. The second verse says, he who guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul. So we have both a physical and a spiritual application right here in these two verses. So, committing sin with our words brings on a whole variety of trouble or distress in life. How many times have you been in a situation, and it doesn't have to be a sinful situation, it can just be any situation in life, and as it is going on or right after, have you ever had that thought, I should have kept my big mouth what? Yeah, we never end that with wide open. Shut. What's happened? We've said something that we should not have said, that has caused some kind of disorder or disruption in our life. Now, that could be, we've talked many times about this idea of gossip. You've said things that you shouldn't have been talking about. Sometimes we say things that need to be said, but we say them at the wrong time. Sometimes we say things that need to be said, but we say them to the wrong person. There's all kinds of combinations here that we can think of where opening our mouth can cause problems. Now, this is not an admonition against ever speaking. We're also told that there are appropriate times to speak. Not speaking up can cause problems as well. But we have this warning. You need to guard your mouth. What's it mean to guard your mouth? Was that? Keep watch on it. You started to say something. Guard where it goes. Think it through. If you're guarding, you're considering. You think a good guard, they're watching what's happening, they're evaluating the situation. If you are guarding your mouth, you are thinking through what is about to emerge from it. It is so easy to just say something without thinking about what is going to come out of it. So if we guard our mouths, we're thinking about the effects of our words, how they're going to be taken, who's going to hear them. What is our intent behind the words? How many times do people say things intending to cause harm to somebody? They're trying to get somebody riled up. They're trying to get them mad. They're trying to hurt their feelings. There's all kinds of awful things that we do with our mouth. And this is saying, guard that. Think about it. What is the result of that going to be? Mm-hmm. Yes, slow to speak, swift to hear. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we are constantly in this rush society. We want to just move along, get things done, and so communication, sometimes we abbreviate things, we say things very quickly, and a lot of times in getting caught up in that rush, we just talk. We say things. We send emails. We send texts. We do all this stuff. So they didn't have texting back when this was written, folks. Now, that didn't mean God was going to be blindsided of, they've invented texting. What do we do now? When he's talking about guarding our speech and guarding the tongue, that applies to any way we're communicating. So don't think, I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to text them and get them. It's communication. Any kind of communication. You're sending the wrong emojis, my friend. Or you're not using them at all. Yeah. Yeah, so body language is a huge part of our communication. And so these remote communication methods, telephone, texting, email, even writing a letter, that takes out a huge part of the way that we communicate and understand the intent behind the words. Because I don't know if you've ever noticed this or not, but English has a lot of words that can have a lot of different meanings and be taken a lot of different ways. And that's not new. How many times have we already talked about in Proverbs, and you've brought up some of them, where the word means this, but it also means this, and they mean very different things? Just words can be confusing.
It doesn't help if you're not talking or discussing with someone of your age group, because what a word means to me is the same thing it means to a 12-year-old.
Yeah. I saw something a little while ago. It said, I never hear people say cool beans anymore, and that makes me upset. You know, growing up, like everything was cool beans, and I always thought, I don't even like cool beans. I like beans, but I want them to be warm. Me too. So that's why that resonated with me when I read that. I was like, but I thought about it. I was like, I don't hear people saying that. You know, right? Because see, I work on a college campus, and the curse of working on a college campus is I get older, but my coworkers don't. They're always the same age group, and if you want to feel old, get in that kind of work situation, because before long, you don't even know what they're saying. You have no idea. You don't know what they're talking about. You don't get the references. You don't understand the slang. You know, and they look at you like you're from another planet, and maybe I am. But we have all of these things that change in meaning. We have these age group problems. So we need to think about what we're doing. Sometimes you can think through what you're saying. And have you ever had this happen? You've thought about it, and maybe you've written down or you said it, and the person who received that communication, what they took from it was not at all what you intended. And it's not that you were trying to upset them. They just had a different frame of reference. They didn't have the body language, whatever it was that caused that barrier to communication. So we can get in trouble with communication very, very easily. Everybody keeps nodding their heads because you know this. You've experienced this. We've all been there. So part of what can help with that is if we take this first bit of advice and just stop, pause, and think for a minute. Before we try to communicate, let's try to think about how is the person who is to receive that communication going to take it. And then it gets really fuzzy when you're trying to communicate with people who have all kinds of different backgrounds, different walk of life, different age groups, because you're trying to be clear in something and everybody is taking things differently. And so far, I may have made it sound like we need to just give up, take a vow of silence, and not communicate. I'm not trying to scare people off from communication, but I want us to pause and consider how complicated it really is.
We had a discussion at one of the trainings I went to in school, and our principal says, we were told that if you're going to send an email that you're upset about, write the email, go to bed, get up the next morning, read it twice. If you still think it's okay, then send it.
Yeah, I've heard a variation of that. You write it and then delete it. Yeah, because a lot of times if you're upset about something, what you're about to say is not going to positively influence the situation. Now, that's certainly not always the case. Right. Yeah. And that's what this is telling us, this idea of guard your mouth. Yeah. If you are short-tempered, like people I know, it's very easy something happens and you have a reaction and you want to talk about it. Stop. That's the advice here. Let that initial reaction wash through, then say something.
It's not just talking, it's action in the midst of emotional distress is often wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It leads you into trouble. It may cause you to say things or do things. Class the other night we were talking about
Yeah, there.
Doesn't have to be evil, can be positive too.
Sure, sure. There's this phrase that goes around a lot called emotional hijacking. So that's when your emotions have now overridden your normal level of control or reason. And it's so easy to end up in that situation. Anger being a very obvious case for that. Embarrassment can have that kind of thing also. So we just have to realize that people's emotions drive them to do things quickly in the moment because they're reacting on that. We do that. And so we should also think about, if we are going to guard our words, we also need to have the wisdom to understand that not everybody that we deal with has read Proverbs. They might not know or realize the importance of guarding their words. We need to be just a little bit understanding. And again, we pause and think, even though they didn't pause before they communicated, we need to give them the benefit of the doubt. You might be more spiritually mature than them. That's all right. But do we stop and think about that in the moment? Do we think about, well, I know I shouldn't do this, and they should too. Maybe they don't. Society really doesn't teach us to hold our tongue anymore. It should. But we're in this fast, rapid communication, this knee-jerk kind of thing. The world's different.
And it's made worse by the remote communication.
Sure.
People say things online they would never say face-to-face.
Sure. Yeah. And we've dealt with that for years with the idea of road rage. We all have seen that. We know what that is. It's the exact same mental state that motivates people to say and do things online, because there's this distance, there's this disconnect, and if you're mad in your car, the odds are the person is not going to come up and punch you in the nose. I dare say a lot of us need to have been punched in the nose. That would really be the great learning curve for society right now. If you post something stupid online and somebody would then come punch you in the nose, I think all of us would be better people. I really do. Maybe we can sign a petition. Maybe we can agree. But violence is not the answer. So I guess we'll have to write that off. Say again? There would. Mine included. Because we do things and say things because of that distance. Mm-hmm. So you're writing off my punching. Yeah. Right. And so that's a great transition here. So, importantly, we are called into accountability for our words, our communication. God holds us accountable for these things. Turn with me to Matthew, and we're looking at verse 12, or chapter 12, verses 36 and 37. Matthew 12, 36 and 37. So every time you post that mean thing online, and I know I can look out in this crowd and tell that we got a whole bunch of Facebook posters. No, probably not. Good. Stay off Facebook. Stay off X. Stay off all of that. But when we see people posting these things, we see people saying things, we need to remember God holds us accountable for all of that. So even though there's not a punch in the nose from each other, God makes note of the effect of our communications. So Matthew 12, 36 and 37 says, "But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." When God rolls the tape of your life, are you going to be able to hold your head up high when He's replaying the greatest hits of your communication? Or are you going to hold your head in shame? Because he's saying you will be accountable. What we do, the effect of our words, has meaning. If it is sinful, he holds us to account for that sin. Idle words, it's not just harmless fun. It's not that, oh, I just like to speak my mind and that's okay. That's not what it's telling us. We are accountable for the things we say. So, we would do well to understand this and avoid then committing sins of the tongue. So, if we want to avoid sins of the tongue, I guess we need to then try to understand, what does that include? Well, fortunately, Proverbs is going to come to our rescue once again. It has a lot to tell us about what this would be. So, there's numerous ways that our words can be sinful. Now, we're going to focus on 7 here, and I'm sure that we could come up with others. If you do come up with others, please share them. If you don't want to talk about them in class, you can text them to me. You can come talk to me. Let's get them talked about. So, one of them, this one shouldn't be a surprise. We see this keep coming up. The idea of talking too much, talking without thinking. You're just rambling. You're just jabbering. We see that a lot in children when they're learning to communicate. You know, they jump from one thing to another. Some people never grow out of that. They just keep on rambling on. And if it is important here that we have this idea of pausing and thinking, we can get ourselves in trouble if everything we say just has to tumble out of our mouths. So we're warned that speech without thought produces foolishness. Proverbs 15, verse 2. Proverbs 15, 2. Let's turn there first. It says, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of the fool pours forth foolishness. That's pretty easy to remember, isn't it? The mouth of the fool pours forth what? Foolishness. Turn a few verses over, Proverbs 15, 28. And I really like this one. This one, if you're into marking in your Bible, you may want to highlight this one. Proverbs 15, 28. It says, the heart of the righteous studies how to answer. There's that pause. There's that consideration that we're talking about. But the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. Now, remember, just a moment ago, we read the idea of the fool and foolishness. Earlier in the study, we talked about, well, who is the fool? The fool in Proverbs is usually referring to the person who is not trying to adhere to God's will. So that would be the wicked person. So we're talking about the same individual here. The fool, the wicked. What is the result? Foolishness. If the fool is godless, then foolishness is godlessness. The wicked is pouring forth evil. Godlessness is evil. So we're talking about the same things here in these two verses. All right, turn a few verses over, Proverbs 29 and verse 11. And this goes to what Miller mentioned a moment ago. Proverbs 29, verse 11. It says, a fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. And again, we see in society so much now, and I've seen it, this kind of increasing in the last couple of years, you know, this idea of, you know, well, I'm just going to say what's on my mind. You know, and that's almost being applauded now as, oh, you're just this strong character, you know, nobody's going to, you know, keep you back or hold you down, you know, I'm just going to speak my mind. How's that described right here? if you're just voicing every feeling, venting every feeling, is saying that's the fool. The wise man holds them back. So the wise man is discerning, figuring out what should be talked about, what shouldn't, how should it be talked about, when should it be talked about. It's not saying that you can't communicate about your feelings and communicate about what's going on, but it's telling us don't do it in this venting fashion. Don't vent everything. Stop, pause, and think. Speech without thought is the problem. It produces foolishness. Thoughts on any of those? All right. Let's look at number 2. Bless you. Whispering and tale-bearing. Whispering and tale-bearing. Now, whispering as in the idea of subtly trying to communicate the things that you're not supposed to be communicating. Not that, I need to tell somebody something, and I don't want everybody to overhear because, it's a solemn moment or whatever. There's a difference between whispering to be quiet and whispering so that you don't get caught saying what you shouldn't be saying. Whispering and tale-bearing. So, speaking where one shouldn't. Gossiping, again, are we seeing a theme with gossip? Have we noticed that in Proverbs already? That keeps coming up, yet that is something that is so prevalent in society, and I don't think we talk about it all that much, and often I think we're far more accepting of it than maybe we should be. There's this warning over and over and over about gossip. We have a lot of verses to talk about here. So whispers and gossips inflict pain, and they wound others. So let's start reading. Turn back to Proverbs 11. Proverbs 11 and verse 13. Proverbs 11:13. So first it's going to identify a little bit of what it's talking about. So it says, a talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. So the talebearer is revealing secrets, things that should not be passed along. Turn over a few pages, Proverbs 16, 27 and 28. Proverbs 16, 27 and 28. And this one cuts straight to it. It doesn't mince words at all. It says, an ungodly man digs up evil, and it is on his lips like a burning fire. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisper separates the best of friends. Does that paint a positive picture of gossip in any way? Certainly not. Certainly not. Ungodly, it says. An ungodly man digs up evil, roots it out, just keeps prying at, trying to cause the trouble, trying to stir it up, trying to instigate. And how motivated are they to do it? It says it's on his lips like a burning fire. I don't know about you, but if my lips are on fire, I'm going to be motivated to do something about it. And that's what it's saying here. They just can't help it. They're just spewing this forth because it is just on their lips like a burning fire. It says, a perverse man sows strife. How does God feel about gossip? It's clear. He's not mincing words here. Ungodly, perverse. A whisperer separates the best of friends. Well, that's one of the results of this. So of course God hates this. God is a God of love. God is a God of forgiveness. God has shown us the ultimate friendship. Show me a better friend than Jesus. Show me somebody who understands friendship better than God. And it says the best of friends can be separated here by the whisperer, the gossiper, the person who is telling tales, telling these things that make people think about things in bad ways or view people in negative ways. Separates the best of friends. Turn over a page or so, Proverbs 17, verse 9. And I think we read this one a couple weeks ago. Proverbs 17:9 says, "He who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates friends." God wants us to seek, bless you, seek love, seek reconciliation, seek positive outcomes. And I can think of no better example of that than Jesus nailed to the cross, and he looks down and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." What an expression of love right there. God wants us to seek love. And so the person who is not spreading the tails is doing God's will. They're trying to seek that peace and that love. Now, again, we need to understand the difference between gossip and between speaking when speaking is necessary. If you are a friend of someone and you see that they are doing something harmful in their life, maybe you need to talk to them about it. You probably don't need to talk to your other friends necessarily about it, especially if they don't know about it. But this isn't saying, oh, just forget everything that other people do. It's not saying that at all. There's a time to speak, but there's a right way to go about it. Go to the person. Talk to them. Don't talk to everybody all around you and get their opinions on it. And, hey, did you know this person's doing this and this person's doing that? That's not what it's telling us to do. All right, turn over another page or so. Proverbs 18, verse 8. Proverbs 18, verse 8. So now we're going to compare this to food. It says, "The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body." Who doesn't like tasty things? We love tasty stuff. We got a whole industry of desserts and marketing and all these sweet things to entice us, and it says it goes down into the inmost body. Well, the implication there is we're ready to take it in, and once we take it in, we pull it in. We're all in at that point. It goes down in the inmost body. It does all this damage. You can't unhear things, folks. If somebody is gossiping and you're hearing it, it's in there. And if we don't have the right mindset, oh man, did you hear about that? Oh, and now you can't stop thinking about it. Like that burning fire on the lips, you've got to go tell somebody else because it's in there. It's got to get out. You've taken it in, and that's how it spreads. It's this warning. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we take these things in and then we spread it. And we take it in because it is tasty to us. And we can see that in society. We've seen the proliferation of this, so we know people react this way. All right, turn over a few pages now. Proverbs 25, verse 23. Proverbs 25, 23. All right, so it says, "The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue, an angry countenance." When you see somebody who finds out that someone's been talking about them, how do they react? There's that punch in the nose, right? We've been talking about this. Here's the angry countenance. That backbiting tongue, that stirs people up. That gets them mad. That gets them angry. That gets them emotionally hijacked. That gets them ready to commit sin. It can be sin of the tongue right back. It can be physical violence. It can be all kinds of things. God doesn't want us to engage in these things that make people angry If we're doing unrighteous things that make people angry, if they are angry, they might do unrighteous things. It's this boulder rolling down the hill. God's wanting us to try to put a stop to as much sin in the world as we can. Don't sin yourself, and don't lead others into it. Don't provoke them into it. Don't help them along. Don't put them on a cart and drag them to it. And this is one of the ways that we do that. But we so often are so dismissive about that. Oh, it's just a little gossip. Oh, it's just hey, did you hear what I heard? And a lot of times we don't even think about it being gossip. If we think about it being gossip, we know that's wrong. And that's where we'll wrap up tonight.